In music, there is a rare phenomenon called blood harmony, the almost supernatural sound when two brothers' voices blend into one. And perhaps no one in history has mastered it like Alton and Rabon Delmore. For 2 decades, their voices were the soul of the Grand Ole Opry, creating the blueprint for country and gospel harmony. They were the superstars of the Grand Ole Opry and the creators of the boogie rhythm that would ignite rockabilly. Yet while the legends they inspired have become immortal, the Delmores themselves have faded into obscurity. This is the story of one of the greatest injustices in music history, how the people who built the house were forgotten when it became a palace. To understand the revolutionary music of the Delmore Brothers, you have to first understand the place that created them, a place of deep, grinding poverty, profound, unshakable faith, and a rich, hidden musicality that grew out of the soil itself. They were born into the heart of the Jim Crow South, in a corner of Limestone County, Alabama, a region still reeling from the economic devastation of the Civil War and Reconstruction. This was a land of red clay and hard-scrabble tenant farms, a system that trapped both poor white and black families in a relentless cycle of debt and dependency. The world they knew was defined by the cotton crop, the credit at the company store, and the constant gnawing uncertainty of survival. Alton, born in 1908, and Rabon, born 8 years later in 1916, grew up in a world without electricity, without plumbing, without any of the distractions of modern life. Their childhood was framed by the seasons, the crops, and the ever-present threat of financial ruin, a situation made even more dire by the boll weevil infestation that ravaged the cotton economy of the South in the 1910s and 20s. In this world, entertainment wasn't something you bought, it was something you made. And the primary form of entertainment, the very lifeblood of the community, was music. The Delmore household was defined by two powerful, seemingly competing musical rivers that flowed directly into the souls of the two young boys. The first was the sacred, haunting, and mathematically precise sound of their mother, Mary Delmore. She was a deeply religious woman and a devoted student of the old tradition of shape-note gospel singing. This wasn't simple four-chord church music. Shape-note or sacred harp singing was a complex, powerful a cappella tradition where entire communities would gather for singing conventions. They would sit in a hollow square, each section representing a different harmony part, and sing from songbooks printed with shaped note heads instead of round ones. The sound was raw, full-throated, and incredibly powerful. From their mother, the boys learned to read music, to understand harmony on a profound level, and to sing the intricate, weaving, close harmony style that would become their trademark. It was music that was formal, ancient, and deeply spiritual. The other river of sound came from the world outside their home, a world their fiddle-playing father, Charlie, embraced. It was the raw, earthly, secular music of the fields, the juke joints, and the freight trains that rattled through the night, promising a world beyond the confines of Limestone County. It was the sound of the black farmhands they worked alongside in the cotton fields, singing the mournful rhythmic cadences of the Delta blues and the call and response of the work song. It was the sound of the new, exciting, piano-driven boogie-woogie they would hear on the race records their father would bring home. This was music that was loose, improvisational, built on feeling and rhythm, and deeply, profoundly human. This duality is the absolute key to unlocking the Delmore Brothers' genius. Their sound was a revolutionary fusion that no one else was attempting. They took the pure, angelic, almost Anglo-Saxon white gospel harmonies of their mother and set them to the driving, syncopated African American blues rhythms of the world around them. In the deeply, violently segregated South of the 1920s and 30s, this was a quiet but profound act of musical integration. They didn't see a barrier between sacred and secular, between black and white music. They just heard American music, and they blended it into something completely new, something that had never been heard before. It was a sound born of Alabama red dirt, shaped by both the church pew and the cotton field. From an early age, it was clear that the two brothers were exceptionally gifted. Alton, the older brother, was the steady, ambitious one. He was a natural songwriter, a storyteller who could craft a compelling narrative about the hardships and hopes of their world in 3 simple verses. He played a standard 6-string Martin guitar with a solid, driving rhythm that became the anchor of their sound, a rhythmic foundation as reliable as the changing seasons. Rabon, 8 years younger, was the prodigy. He was the fiery, brilliant, and often unpredictable instrumentalist, and he played an instrument that was almost unheard of in hillbilly music at the time, the tenor guitar. A tenor guitar is a smaller 4-string instrument, typically tuned like a tenor banjo. In Rabon's hands, it became their secret weapon. While Alton held down the steady rhythm, Rabon would weave intricate, lightning-fast, single-string lead lines and improvised runs that were unlike anything anyone was playing on the guitar in country music. He wasn't just strumming chords, he was playing lead melodies, answering his brother's vocal lines, and creating a dynamic interplay that was years ahead of its time. He was, in essence, one of the very first country guitar heroes, a direct precursor to the bluegrass flat pickers and rockabilly soloists who would come decades later. They began performing at local fiddlers' conventions and schoolhouse gatherings, the primary cultural events in their community. These were vibrant, competitive affairs where local musicians would battle for bragging rights and small cash prizes. The young Delmores, with their unique and polished sound, began to stand out. While other string bands of the era were often wild, raucous, and a little rough around the edges, the Delmores were something different. They were sophisticated. Their harmonies were so tight, so perfectly in sync, it was often difficult to tell where one voice ended and the other began. They were professionals in a world of passionate amateurs. In 1932, in the absolute depths of the Great Depression, with the family facing financial ruin, Alton made a bold, almost desperate decision. He and the 16-year-old Rabon scraped together what little money they had, hitched a ride, and traveled to Nashville to audition for the most important show in country music, the Grand Ole Opry. They walked into the WSM radio station, 2 nervous, skinny farm boys in their Sunday best, and played for the Opry's founder, the solemn old judge, George D. Hay. He was floored. He hired them on the spot. Their impact on the Opry was immediate and profound. Their smooth, bluesy, harmony-driven sound was a revelation, a stark contrast to the more chaotic, old-timey string bands that dominated the show's early years. They became one of the Opry's most popular acts of the 1930s, their records on the Bluebird label selling well across the South. But life as an Opry star in that era was far from glamorous. The pay from the radio station was meager, and the real money was made on the road, playing grueling personal appearances. As Alton later wrote in his autobiography, this meant a different town every night, driving hundreds of miles on unpaved roads in unreliable cars, sleeping in cheap boarding houses, and often getting cheated by shady promoters. Throughout this period, Alton's songwriting flourished. He wrote about what he knew, the hardship of the farming life in their classic Brown's Ferry Blues, the loneliness of the road in Gonna Lay Down My Old Guitar, and the ever-present symbol of escape, the freight train. His songs were honest, poetic, and deeply relatable to their working-class audience. By the late 1940s, however, the musical landscape was beginning to change, and the Delmores, always restless innovators, changed with it. They began to experiment with a much more up-tempo, heavily blues-based sound. They infused their music with the driving, eight-to-the-bar rhythm of boogie-woogie piano, adapting it for their two-guitar lineup. They called it country boogie. Songs like their 1946 hit Freight Train Boogie were, in retrospect, a musical earthquake. With its driving beat, Rabon's virtuosic proto-rockabilly guitar solo, and Alton's bluesy vocal, it was, for all intents and purposes, a rock and roll song, a full decade before Sam Phillips ever heard Elvis Presley. This restless innovation eventually led them to a fateful and career-defining decision. In the mid-1940s, they left the relative security and prestige of the Grand Ole Opry and the major labels like RCA and Decca. They signed with a new, fiercely independent record label based not in Nashville, but in Cincinnati, Ohio. The label was King Records. This move would lead them to the greatest success of their career, and it would further cement their legacy as artists who walked between worlds. King Records, run by the brilliant, cantankerous, and cigar-chomping Sid Nathan, was known primarily as a race records label, its roster filled with some of the most important black R&B and blues artists of the day, like Wynonie Harris and Bull Moose Jackson. For a white country act like the Delmores to sign with King was highly unusual, but it was a perfect fit. At King's integrated studio, they found a creative freedom they never had in the more conservative Nashville system. They were encouraged to embrace their blues influences, to rock a little harder, to be themselves. It was at King Records in 1949 that they gathered with a handful of other musicians, including Wayne Rainey on harmonica and the comic duo Homer and Jethro on mandolin and rhythm guitar, to record their magnum opus. It was a song Alton had written, a simple, mournful three-chord plea that seemed to capture the collective weariness and existential dread of a post-war world on the brink of the atomic age. It was a song that wasn't just country or blues, it was a universal human cry. The song was Blues Stay Away From Me, with its haunting, unforgettable harmony, its simple, heartbreaking lyrics, and a beautiful, crying steel guitar line. The song was an instant and massive hit. It became their signature song, an anthem that has been recorded by hundreds of artists, from Johnny Cash and Gene Vincent to the Everly Brothers, Bob Dylan, and the Notting Hillbillies. It is, without question, one of the most important and enduring songs in the American musical canon. At the dawn of the 1950s, the Delmore Brothers were on top of the world. They had a massive, career-defining hit, a creatively fulfilling record deal, and a reputation as two of the most respected musicians in the business. But the tide of popular music was about to change with brutal speed, and the world they had helped to create was, tragically, about to leave them behind. The 1950s brought a seismic shift to the world of country music, the era of the brother duet and the acoustic string band. The very world the Delmores had dominated for nearly 2 decades was coming to a sudden and decisive end. The new stars of the day were the solo honky-tonk singers, powerful, charismatic, and often tragically flawed figures like Hank Williams, Webb Pierce, and Lefty Frizzell. The sound of Nashville was also changing, consolidating its power and becoming slicker, more polished, and more commercially focused. The Nashville sound, pioneered by producers like Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley, with its pop-influenced arrangements, smooth background vocalists, and studio gloss, was just around the corner. The Delmore Brothers' intricate blues-based acoustic sound, once seen as sophisticated and modern, began to seem old-fashioned to the new generation of record executives and radio programmers. They were seen as relics of a bygone pre-war era. At the same time, the nearly 30 years of hard living on the road were taking a terrible toll, especially on the younger, more volatile Rabon. He had become a heavy drinker, and his health was rapidly and visibly deteriorating. The fiery, brilliant prodigy, the man whose fingers could dance across the guitar neck like no one else, was burning out. In the midst of this professional and personal turmoil, Rabon was diagnosed with lung cancer, a result of a lifetime of chain-smoking, unfiltered cigarettes. The final recording sessions of the Delmore Brothers are heartbreaking to listen to. You can hear the weariness and the sadness in Alton's voice, and the frailty in Rabon's once blistering guitar playing. But the harmony, that perfect, almost supernatural blood harmony, was there until the very end, a testament to a lifetime of singing side by side, a sound that even sickness and sorrow could not break. Rabon Delmore's battle with lung cancer began more than a year before his death. The diagnosis came in 1951, a devastating blow to the talented musician who was known for his energy and virtuosity on stage. For a man who lived and breathed singing and playing the harmonica, the disease was an especially cruel foe. But in the cutthroat world of touring musicians, there was no such thing as a sick day. The show had to go on. Throughout the last year of his life, Rabon showed extraordinary courage. Even as the disease ravaged his body, leaving him thin and often in pain, he would take the stage with his brother Alton. Fans could see him weakened, a shadow of himself, but when he lifted his voice to break into his signature soaring tenor, the magic was still there. The bond of brotherhood and music carried him through the pain, night after night. Finally, on December 4th, 1952, just as Christmas was beginning, Rabon Delmore's courageous but hopeless battle ended in a hospital in Athens, Alabama. He was only 36 years old. For Alton, it was more than the loss of a brother. It was the silence of half his soul. With Rabon gone, the Delmore brothers were no more. The perfect harmony, the sound they had created together since childhood, was forever silenced. The dynamic between the two brothers was the central, driving force of their music and their lives. Their personalities were perfectly complementary, and their voices blended in the same seamless, intuitive way. After Rabon's death, Alton was completely and utterly adrift. He had lost not only his beloved younger brother, but his musical other half, the person he had been making music with since he was a child. He tried to soldier on with a solo career. He even tried forming a new duo with his son, Lionel. But the magic was gone. The Nashville that he returned to in the 1950s was a foreign country to him. It was a world of big business, of producers in suits, of a polished, pop-oriented sound that had no room for the raw, red dirt blues he had pioneered. He felt betrayed and forgotten by the very industry he had helped to build. He saw younger artists, many of whom had openly and obviously copied his and Rabon's style, becoming wealthy superstars while he struggled to get a record deal or a booking. This deep, gnawing sense of bitterness and neglect is laid bare in the remarkable and remarkably sad autobiography he wrote late in his life, a book with the painfully ironic title, Truth is Stranger Than Publicity. In its pages, which he typed out himself on an old typewriter, Alton tells their story with a raw, unflinching honesty that is rare in celebrity memoirs. He speaks of the grinding, humiliating poverty of their childhood, the shady dealings of music promoters who cheated them out of their earnings, the physical toll of a lifetime on the road, and his profound, unending grief over the loss of his brother. It is a heartbreaking and essential document, a first-hand account of a foundational artist watching himself be written out of history in real time. In one particularly poignant passage, he wrote about the new Nashville sound. It all began to sound the same to me, the same musicians on every session, the same chord progressions, the same feel. They took the soul out of it. They took the blues out of it. Our kind of music didn't have a chance. In another, he expressed the pain of being forgotten. People will come up and tell me they hear our sound in a lot of the music today. I know they do, but the folks that are getting the money don't know it, or at least they won't admit it. It's the sound of a man who knows his own worth and knows it has been ignored. Alton Delmore spent the final years of his life running a mail-order business and a small TV repair shop in Huntsville, Alabama, trying to keep his and his brother's legacy alive through his writing and his correspondence with a small but dedicated group of fans and music historians. But the weight of loss, the collapse of his career, and the years of hardship took their toll on his health. Alton Delmore died of a heart attack, accompanied by liver disease in 1964, just 12 years after his brother. He died at the age of 55, carrying with him the bitter feeling of failure of a man who believed that the musical world he had helped to build had completely forgotten him. The Delmore Brothers' legacy is not one of fame, but of innovation. They fused gospel and blues, created the boogie rhythm that was a precursor to rock and roll, and influenced everyone from Hank Williams to Bob Dylan. Though the brothers died thinking they had been forgotten, they were wrong. Their names may have faded, but their musical DNA lives on in bluegrass harmonies, rockabilly rhythms, and in the songs of the legends they inspired. They were the unsung architects of American music.